So speaking of your time in Washington, the Biden administration at least is widely thought of not to have been wimpy, at least the degree of animosity and enmity that it provoked among private equity and venture capital and tech people is pretty unprecedented, at least in recent administrations. You've said that you think, I guess, a two-part question. What do you think the legacy of that is in the end? Do you think it accomplished something? And you've said in terms of voters that the problem was not so much what you did, it was a failure of messaging. I've heard that from people in the Biden administration elsewhere. Do you really believe that it's just messaging?
No, I don't know. If I really said that, I'm embarrassed that I said that because I always
Okay.
feel it's an excuse that everybody uses. Uh, First, you blame comms, then you blame your lawyers. What's next? Who's next to mine? Yeah, everybody, everybody comes out of everything, unless you win another election, then everything's about your particular brilliance. Um, so I, it's interesting to hear you say that it's true. We aroused a lot of anger, particularly in merger policy. Though I have to say that this administration is, 10 times more aggressive than we are in terms of government action. Now, some of that's very different type of action, like criminal prosecution or tariffs or firing officials. I mean, they're way more aggressive than we were. And in some ways, it made my line of thinking is that in some ways we weren't aggressive enough in terms of doing things for the population that they could notice. I mean, maybe this turns a little bit to the messaging, but in terms of being, we got started the antitrust campaign. We wanted to make it clear. We managed to make them angry, but we were um, less straightforward. And now I guess this is blaming lawyers. Where we were sometimes timid to announce what we were doing because of the various rules around communication among current cases.
Well,
Actually,
I
can
guess.
I follow up? And I
Yeah.
ask the same question in a slightly more aggressive way because Bethany is very polite and I'm not. It says a common friend, and I don't want to reveal his name, but a common friend, Tim, said that basically Lina Khan made President Trump win. And it's not out of the question in the sense that we know that the victory was of 2 or 3 percentage points. That is exactly what the Silicon Valley and its people move around, and they move mostly because of Lina Khan. And we both like Lina Khan's actions, so this is not to blame her. Is to blame maybe the strategy of saying, and you write in your book that when you have a lot of economic power, this translates into political power, and you're going to react. So
Yeah.
if you go after the biggest monopolies that history has ever known, you don't want to go there with an army of guerrilla people. You need to have a serious, dedicated army to fight. And I feel that there was a lot of disorganization and not coherence. So the Democratic Party was divided, and there were some key leaders like you and John Cantor, Lina Khan, but I cannot say that there was like serious troops that really expressed this message and convince the people that this is the right direction. And even like a big chunk of the senators and the Congress people were not behind you, so much so that you couldn't even pass a law. This was like a guerrilla tactic against the strongest army in the world. Is not going to work.
Yeah, I have a few reactions to that. You know, it's very common after an election, everyone can pinpoint something. Maybe it was immigration. If only they'd done immigration differently. If they'd messaged differently, and handled inflation differently. If they'd fired the Federal Reserve chairman. I've heard like 40 different theories of like the one thing they would have done that would have won the election. So I'm not really, um, if they'd done environmental policy differently, they managed to make all these guys mad. So there's like, what would be the right word in academia? It's overdetermined. You can always pick up your one little thing that you thought would have turned it, And I don't know. I think that's quite possible, given inflation, which is poison to any elected government, which defeated governments, including conservative governments in the United Kingdom and other places. That even if we had done nothing on antitrust, we still would have lost due to the inflation poison. And the problem and immigration policy. Now I'm thinking on another issue, which seemed to be like the most. I sincerely doubt that a lot of voters. Now you could say, all right, maybe Elon Musk wouldn't have turned, but a lot of doubters were thinking. A lot of voters. I mean, we're thinking, oh, that Lina Khan, I really don't like her. I'm going to vote against her. And I guess you could say the money was donated, but there was unlimited money in this race on all sides. Right. I mean, these are
sorry. The unlimited money came because Kamala Harris refused to run on a platform of antitrust. Had she really ran on the Lina Khan platform, the money would not have been there. Reid Hoffman was very clear.
Now you've said something wrong. In presidential elections, unlike an obscure, let's say, local election for state senate or something where money matters, you've far past the federal presidential elections past the point of any return on the money with the amount invested. You could add $1 billion on either side, doesn't make any difference, because there's at some point you have no one didn't know who Kamala Harris or President Trump was by the end of it. No one had, there was oversaturation. There was no more attention to be bought out there. So I conclusively reject that theory. And I'll say something else. Politics is one thing. Policy to me is more important. And there are both political cycles of things going up and down, but the longer cycles of policy are kind of more important. And for me personally, this was the long game in antitrust. I don't think it had an effect on electoral outfits, and it was clearly time for the country to reboot the antitrust laws. So that's where I would defend it in that picture. And you can get too caught up in the back and forth of politics. That said, I'm saying I'm thrilled that the Trump administration win, but I firmly reject the idea that having, in fact, if Kamala Harris, look, maybe she would have lost anywhere. She's not a great candidate, but if she had, doubled down on the price gouging kind of Bernie Sanders AOC kind of line, she might have stood a better chance. That's what I personally think.
Why do you think you said something that the Trump administration, in terms of its actions toward corporations, has been a lot more aggressive than the Biden administration ever was? And I started to think about that and thought that's really true. So why was there so much rage toward the Biden administration, and why is there almost a bended knee toward the Trump administration? Is it as simple as fear, or is it the belief that the Trump administration ultimately can be manipulated such that these players will get what they want at the end of the day?
That is a really great question, because tariffs, the tariffs are obviously a terrible thing for so many American businesses, and are much more aggressively imposed. Now, they obviously help some domestic businesses, but they hurt a lot of them as well. I guess I am reluctant to give Trump credit, but there may be something to the fact that because it's from the president himself, as opposed to the head of an agency, and because the threats seem more immediately terrifying, that he manages to terrify business as opposed to evoke their outrage. I don't think businesses were truly afraid of Lina Khan or Jonathan Cantor. They didn't like these lawsuits, and so maybe that's it. Or maybe it is, as you said, it sort of evokes gets into some really deep, weird stuff where people respond to kind of this imperial thing by taking the knee. And like, whatever you want to say about Lina and Jonathan, or even myself, we were not like in this position of the emperor and summoning the people to come bow before us in some way. I don't know. This goes slightly, maybe I've been spending too much time in Rome, and that's why I'm thinking about all this. Your analogies. I mean, when you're there, you can't help thinking about Julius Caesar and the fall of the Republic. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand the relationship, but I think that to some extent you're right that the Biden administration did not have an imperial president that emanated this. Was more sort of some group of people to which you belong that was supporting some ideas, but was not clear what Biden wanted.
Yeah.
And I think that, in a sense, this is a slightly different way of what I was saying earlier. The Democratic Party was divided. There wasn't a common message. If there is a common message, I think you can defeat any sort of political pressure or business pressure. But if you're divided, you're eaten alive. And I think that the Democratic Party was divided in these issues and was eaten alive.
I mean, it's possible if you imagine a different thing where Bernie Sanders won and Bernie Sanders said, this is how it's going to be, and ignored all the stuff about talking about cases, said, we're breaking you guys up. This is happening now. And he controlled Congress. And he said, we're doing it by antitrust or we're doing it by this, but, we feel that this sector is too concentrated. So either break yourself up or we'll do it. That might have been a very different conversation. But we were, in a sense, maybe this is a weird way of saying that Lina and I needed more power.
Now that's a good answer.